den Rechten.
Bir müşteri olan
Den rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
In the late 1990s, we started a project in Munich in the research center on risk, society and reflexive modernization, which had this fancy title, Mobility Pioneers. And what I'm trying to figure out in these few minutes is that I think it's there is a kind of development from these pioneering mobilities, the new things and the opening up of different forms of mobilities into a sort of normalization of that. So that what in, let's say, in the 1990s was something, in some ways, in business life, something spectacular or extraordinary becomes more and more something, an essential normal part of our lives. And when I'm making interviews in the industry in the 1990s, when I did that, and the early 2000s, people have been talking about that they went to China, and their colleagues said, "Wow, you went to China." But today, it's the one says he's going to China, and the other one is telling a story about India and Australia. So, I think it's a lot of these things have changed in business life. And but it's not only on spatial mobility and traveling, it's also on virtual mobilities. When we started the project, the Mobility Pioneers in the late 1990s, we've been harshly criticized for using that term of virtual mobilities, and people said, "You're totally crazy, that doesn't make any sense." Actually, in the same way, or a little bit different, but it's with the same kind of message. When we started working on aero mobilities, it was that someone said, a colleague said, "Well, what about this aero mobilities? I'm going to an airport, I check in, I fly out, so where is the research program?" So that was because he argued this is kind of a minority of people. And I'm not saying that everybody today is using the internet. Not everybody is using mobile phones. Not everybody is always accessible somewhere else where he is, and not everybody is using planes and airports. But nobody is living a life without being depending from the internet, from airports, from flight connections, and so forth. So our life has changed in that way, in a very rapid, in a very fast way. This picture that I brought you, we call the socio-spatial pattern of virtual mobility management. The background of the Mobility Pioneers project was always that we've been asking, how do actually people organize? How do they manage what we call the mobility imperative, the need to be mobile or to present oneself as a mobile person? And that's the reason why we talk about mobility management. It's not management on the corporate level or on institutional level. It's how people organize and manage their life. And this picture I brought you is a pattern from a journalist where we made interviews in the early 2000s with her. I asked her, what are the important places in your life? Please type in the important places in the center of that picture and those places which are important but less important and on the outer skirts or the boundaries of that picture. And the first thing that she wrote in was my email, my PC, my house and my desk. And at this time you need to consider it was in the early 2000s. We've been really surprised that she kind of added to that as the important places in her life. So an email program is not a place in our understanding, but in her understanding it was a place. The second that she added was 3 websites. And then she wrote in the university, her birthplace and the residence where she is. But actually the residence and the birthplace don't play a very important role in that pattern. And this was an interview with a very successful journalist at this time. And it was kind of pioneering in that understanding to find a pattern like this in the empirical research. But you might say, yeah, but that's quite normal. It's I know a lot of people like this, but this is actually what I say. This is the development from being pioneering mobility into a normalization of mobility. We've entered a time or a situation, social situation, where we all live, in some senses, digital lifestyles. And what I like is this quotation from Aaron Kellerman from 2006, where he says, "New sophisticated virtual mobilities permit us to be in touch without any regard to the location of the cities or countries from which communication comes, nor with regard to the internal spatial structures of cities from which we call." I think this is a sort of placelessness in some senses, but it indicates a cultural change in that sense that we are kind of layering different spaces, social spaces, virtual spaces, geographical spaces, technological spaces into each other. And each of us and every person has a specific constellation of these different spaces. And now I'm reading quotations, but I really, one of my favorite quotations is on that is indicating that there is a significant cultural change in that, which is where we actually don't know yet how this is going to transform our life in this modern world. And it comes from John Tomlinson, and he says, "Mechanical velocity is still with us in abundance. The night mail still runs, distance and the physical effort to overcome it still stubbornly persists. But now we have something else. Now we have the phenomenon of immediacy, which in its light, effortless, easy ubiquity has more or less displaced the cultural attachments of an earlier speed. And with this displacement comes a shift in cultural assumptions, expectations, attitudes and values." And what he describes there with mentioning cultural assumptions, expectations, attitudes and values is actually that a new way of thinking about life, mobile life, but also a new way of thinking about interaction has come into the world, and this is probably going to change our world. And the big question today is has this kind of potential to develop sort of sustainable mobility, or is this a kind of threatening process? In their book Mobile Lives from Elliot and Urey, they describe the significance of what they call miniaturized mobilities. That means that we are carrying all these technological devices with us, which enable us to be in contact and to be kind of stable in relation to other people and to other places, to colleagues, to business, to other websites and so forth, while we are traveling somewhere. And what they actually describe there is that this process of constantly receiving and sending information, this process of constantly scheduling meetings and contacts and so forth, is a process of reorganizing or constantly reorganizing our social networks and the socio-geographical shape of these networks. That means in some ways around us we are in a world which is constantly in motion, and the only stable thing or reliable thing probably is for many people who are using these devices is the mobile phone, or is the internet, the virtual communication and the virtual mobilities. And I brought you a video from a company. It's I need to say that because you can see that in the video. It's from IBM, and that actually shows how the usual thing. This video ends up with the formulation: "What is actually going on?" One guy asks the other, and then he says, "The usual." And for me, this video is very interesting. Kind of exemplification of what we think, that it's kind of a little bit overdoing the issue, but it's exactly this, that we are living in a world where a lot of things around us are constantly in motion, and we are, as individuals, are those who have to handle the configuration, the constellation of these mobile things in the world. So technologies are becoming more and more driving factors for the way how we organize and structure our lives and our social relations and places. Coming back to the Mobility Pioneers project, we found three ideal types of how people organize, how they manage their lives, and we call them the centered mobility management. Let's say it's the classical thing of a salesman, a salesperson, who is traveling to customers and coming back in the evening, or who's traveling for 2 days and coming back, but with a very clear-cut, defined place of belonging and of social fixities. The second pattern we call the decentered mobility management, where people actually have different places where it's hard to figure out which is the place of the most important, or is it a network out of, let's say, 3 or 4 different places which are on the same level of importance, social importance for them. And the third pattern that we figured out, or that we found in, in the empirical data, is what we call the network mobility management, where what I described before, the different spaces are kind of layered, boxed into each other, and people organize the stable social relations by using the internet. We had, for example, one interview partner, he had a website with his calendar on the website. So if people wanted to meet him, they could immediately access the website and see, okay, he's coming to Frankfurt, or he is in New York. I'm in New York too, we can schedule a meeting there. I'm not talking about an everyday pattern that everybody has. It's a pioneering pattern at this point, but it would definitely be interesting kind of having a follow-up research on that, how these patterns look like today. What is part of my work today is that I'm working together with a research group in Munich on the question, how can we actually handle these mobility expectations, and how people in business life can develop a sort of sustainable, socially sustainable mobility without the negative impacts of that. Because today in business life, the French sociologists Boltanski and Capello, they described that very, very precisely, that everybody has to behave, has to kind of set on stage oneself as a mobile individual. So we are mobile subjects, we are able to handle all these things. But the research on that, if you ask people how actually this mobility regime they are living in works, and what is the, let's say, the consequence for work-life balance and all these aspects, there's a lot of really complicated and threatening issues in that. Apart from this normalization I was describing, there are 3 more dimensions which are kind of frameworking the way how people are mobile, well, professionally mobile. And the one thing is that the individual has to take over much more responsibility for how mobility looks like, has more responsibility to make decisions about, well, switching off the mobile phone, not taking the flight, booking a flight which is more expensive but with a stopover, without a stopover somewhere else. So this kind of self-regulation aspect and taking care of oneself comes much more to the individual. People have to struggle and to handle much more constraints from time-space compression. You can communicate from everywhere. It opens up a lot of new opportunities, but it also opens up a lot of pressure, and it's kind of a lot of pressure enters into the organization of work. And the third dimension is that there is a lot of pressure from companies to rationalize mobility, to get cheaper flights, to spend less time abroad, less time by traveling, using more or making more meetings during that time and so forth. The main message of that project or that work is actually that also if we all think that mobility is totally normal, it's actually not. It's something that we need to develop. It's something that we need to learn. It's something where we need to kind of develop that competence to handle mobility and to the potentials of mobility in a sustainable way. But it also comes to the fact that we all need to learn to be immobile, to make decisions against traveling, to slow down our mobility and to reduce the amount of mobility. And on a corporate level, I think I definitely don't want to make any kind of promotion for any companies, but IKEA's concept meet more, travel less. Using more virtual mobility instead of traveling. I think it's a very interesting case study to understand how actually the normalization enters the companies and how it is organized and what policies can be developed to reduce the amount of traveling.
Seite sowie den Ausweis in Rechten.